Hello and welcome to Studio One here in Tromode for the first of two programmes where we'll be speaking to and meeting the candidates in the South Douglas by-election. It all takes place on August the 27th, and in this programme we'll be meeting three of the candidates, and we'll also be meeting the remainder of the candidates in part two. A slight imbalance for various reasons due to one of the candidates being off island and the other being unwell, but we will speak to them all and find out a little bit about what makes them tick ahead of August the 27th. I am joined this evening by the fashion design and company director Claire Christian, Michael Josem, David Fowler. Thank you for your time. I will start by asking you to make an opening statement, and in the order that you declared, I will go for Claire. Claire Christian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, James. Firstly, I just want to say thank you to my fellow candidates for being so professional and having such good Manx spirit in this election campaign. It's been really great. So my proven track record of helping thousands of workers during COVID-19 is a testament to my resolve and determination to build a vibrant society where a worker can be successful and thrive in a flourishing economy. Our economy needs our help now. Firstly, we need to focus on small businesses at the heart of our community. It is the backbone of our economy. Secondly, the Isle of Man is home to many international businesses, and we must keep an open dialogue with those businesses to allow them to continue to contribute to our economy and protect Manx jobs. Thirdly, we must explore new sectors to start up or relocate and encourage external investment, and also encourage jobs for our islanders to return back after they've studied at university. The cost of living needs to be reduced now. Bills are excruciatingly high. Where families are deciding between heat or eat, poverty is here now. We need to scrutinise monopoly providers or near monopoly providers to push down the cost of living, and we need to encourage cheaper renewable energy. Education is paramount, and teachers need to be rewarded, and we need to remove red tape and the bureaucracy to allow teachers to teach. I am the candidate who is helping Douglas South constituents now, and I will continue even if I'm not elected. I won't take no for an answer, and I will provide solutions, and I believe that one person can make a change and can shape policy. Thank you, James.
Thank you very much, Claire. 10 candidates vying for 2 seats, as we know. The second candidate to declare, Michael Josem.
Thanks, James. My name's Michael Josem, and I'm running to be a strong voice for Douglas South in the by-election on August the 27th. I'm running because in recent months many local residents have encouraged me to stand. They've said we need someone who will be our representative to the government instead of the government's representative to us. I'm running because we need someone who will fight for local jobs, someone who will stand up and fight for local jobs, not just economically and financially, but also so that we have the sufficient reserves and sufficient income to sustain the other social benefits that come from that. I'm also running to be a strong voice to protect our health service, to ensure that it remains local, high quality and accessible. And the third key reason I'm running is because we need someone who will fight to ease the squeeze on household budgets. With the rising cost of gas in the past and the rising cost of fees and charges, we need to do something about that. And that's why I'm running. And so that's why my manifesto is talking about clear, achievable plans over the next 12 months to be a strong voice for the people of Douglas South.
Thank you very much, Michael. And last but certainly not least tonight, self-employed businessman and landscape gardener David Fowler.
Hello there, my name's David Fowler. I'm a self-employed businessman running a landscape gardening company, and I've lived in Douglas South for over 10 years. I have tenacious grit, determination, passion and energy to get your voice heard from day one. My main objectives are protecting the elderly, vulnerable and disabled, making sure our taxes are spent efficiently, protecting the environment, growing the economy for the benefit of all people, whilst maintaining low taxes and improving democracy in Tynwald. And I believe I'm the best candidate to steer the island in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all three candidates for opening statements. Well, We've been having a look at the manifesto, so let's dig deep into that. And I'll start with you, Claire, if I may. I mean, you said, I think it reads, you're the candidate who understands what you need to succeed. So enlighten me, if you would, embellish on that a little.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So what we need to succeed as a government, just as a whole, we need to make sure that we are stimulating our economy, which I spoke about a little bit about in my introduction. And how we do that is by providing jobs. At the moment, obviously, the unemployment is going up, but we're doing far better than the UK because of our backbone of our economy, which I spoke about before. Our small businesses and self-employed people make up 70% of our island. And if we didn't have that in our community, then we would have far more unemployed people now. And so we need to keep that stimulation, and we need to make sure that that carries on throughout the next year and so on.
More important than ever now, presumably.
Absolutely.
You say it's time to unite voices in South Douglas. Do we as a constituency need uniting?
Do you know, I think that was one of the things that obviously came out from COVID, from COVID-19. It was one of the things that I did as something to help businesses and help people, was to unite those voices. And if there was a certain issue, and I can give you an example, in Bluffton Manor Hill, there's a situation whereby a lot of the residents are struggling to get on one of the local buses. The bus journey doesn't start till 6 minutes past 11 in the morning, and then it's there 2 hours thereafter. And it was about uniting all of those people and actually saying, right, let's come together. So I'm going to work with those constituents. I've been told that it's because there's a reduced amount of limit, that's why there's not a bus before then. So what I want to do is work with those constituents and say, right, when do you want that time? When we get that service back up and running in September, let's make sure we use that service and overpopulate it so that the government can't suddenly turn around to us and say, oh, well, you weren't on it at 9 o'clock in the morning. Let's get that voice heard and do that together.
Michael Josem, you've said, interestingly, this intrigued me, I'm not interested in politics, I'm interested in policies. So what are your policies? Just a snapshot of them, if you would.
Sure. So I guess my policy is first and foremost fighting for jobs. And so with unemployment here in the Isle of Man now a quarter higher than in the UK, according to this week's statistics, I think it's really important that we take concrete steps to fight for local jobs. And so that's why in my manifesto, talking about a few key things, such as investing in local infrastructure. That means roads, bike paths, broadband, so everyone has access to it. Second of all, it means no new taxes. That means that already we have so many households and businesses that are struggling. Finances are very fragile. And so it's really important, I think, and many residents have told me, that it's really important that we do not put household budgets under further strain.
You said, and all candidates would say this, I suppose, they'd fight for a local, quality, accessible healthcare service. We can all say that, but how would you make the difference, or at least attempt to make it happen?
Sure, so there's three parts to that: local, high quality and accessible. So in terms of local, speaking to residents in recent weeks, many of them are increasingly concerned about travelling across to Liverpool or London or elsewhere. And now, with various cancer treatments around the world, with modern technology becoming increasingly specialised, it's not necessarily practical to have all the world's leading cancer experts here on the Isle of Man. But that means building and investing in infrastructure, for example, at Nobles Hospital, to ensure that they can communicate quickly and easily with doctors across without having to put through the stress and the arduous test. For some people who are sick, it's a rough time going across to Liverpool for a 20-minute meeting. Second of all, in terms of accessible, one of the things that's really important to me is to ensure that our National Health Service here on the Isle of Man remains universally accessible and free at the point of delivery. And so I'm really concerned about the Isle of Man government's proposals to corporatise the health service here on the Isle of Man following the Sir Jonathan Michaels report. I'm nervous about that. I'm very sceptical of that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that the Health Minister and the Chief Minister and the government clears that and maintains that clear and very accessible hurdle, so that I will only support this on behalf of the people of Douglas South if it meets the demands of the people of Douglas South.
We'll come back to health. Thank you very much. David Fowler, this is your second attempt, of course. You stood at the 2016 general election 4 years ago. I think you polled something like, it was more than 300 votes last time.
Yes.
If you have that many, if you brought that body of support with you this time, I would suspect you've got a very good chance of being elected. So I suppose the question is, do you think you have, and you've obviously been knocking on the door and meeting some of them again?
Yes, I mean, I've had a lot more positive vibes this time. You know, hopefully I will do well. I mean, I've had people that haven't ever voted or haven't voted for a long time, and I've sort of inspired them to come out and vote, and lots of people have shaken my hand and said good luck, and they want me to win and things. So
if elected,
you know,
I mean, effectively it's 12 months. It's a minimum 12 months before the general election. So what would be your priority to achieve in that time?
To try and get the spending down. We're spending too much money. We're going to, you know, if we keep spending...
You think we're eating into our reserves too much, do you?
Yeah. You know, we've either got to make efficiencies or they're going to have to put taxes up. We're going to run out of money, you know.
And I just want to repeat that question for both Claire and Michael first.
So I respect where David's coming from, but I fundamentally disagree with his point of view, in that I don't think that now is the time for austerity policies. The whole point of having reserves, the whole point of being a relatively rich country, is so that when a once-in-a-century pandemic hits, we're able to be resilient, we're able to draw on those reserves to help those people in need. And so I disagree. I respect where David's coming from, but I disagree with that fundamental policy.
You'd be on the other side of the scale.
Very much so.
Like Christian?
Yeah, and I think speaking to a lot of people in the constituency, they're very concerned that the money that we have been spending, where's that going to come from? And they're talking about pensions, tax rises, etc. And obviously people are really concerned about that happening. So I think as a government, we need to start reassuring people what we have as a plan and what we're going to do. I think in terms of what we have to do in this next year, as a government, and I'll just directly look at that, we need to streamline, make it more efficient. We need the actual government to actually look at how they're doing things, learn from what they did during COVID-19. They, you know, as working in the private sector, you would have a business that would jettison people into departments when there was an overload happening that month. And that happened during COVID, and we need to start doing that instead of employing more people in those areas so that we can keep the costs down and have a more streamlined government.
You say, Mr. Fowler, that the island needs a shake-up. So in what way?
Yes. Well, as I say, we're just spending and the reserves going down. It's not good. You know, in years to come, we're going to, if we don't change things, we're going to regret it and be a lot poorer for it, you know.
Let's talk COVID then, because it's obviously here and now still. I mean, Claire Christian, you say you've a proven track record in supporting local businesses and that you fought for thousands of workers during COVID, and obviously you had quite a profile during that period. Was it actually thousands?
Yes, it was. And you know, the membership of the Facebook group, I think, is in some aspect of 2,500 people. And you know, it's a testament to me going around the doors of Just Douglas South, and you know, it's already a sort of when I've knocked on the doors and they're opening, and I've got people saying, oh my goodness, you've helped my husband, he wouldn't be out at work today if it wasn't for you. Or another lady would say, Claire, you know, that's absolutely brilliant, we're already voting for you for what you did. But I didn't do that then because of this. What I did then has inspired me to do this.
How, if you're successful in this by-election, how would you pledge to continue that work?
Absolutely continue it. And I did this before the election. I helped people before the election, not just in terms of businesses. I made myself accessible to people to actually call and ring me and say, I'm having a problem getting food during COVID-19 and things like that. It wasn't just business support. And I take great pride in that I became that person that people could rely on, as an MHK would do. And so now, even if I don't get elected, I said before in my opening statement, you know, I'll continue that good work on, I'll continue the local companies, and even if I do get elected, I will continue the local companies as well.
You said earlier small businesses form the bedrock, if you like, of the economy. How would you looking at bringing new industries to the island?
So we have a really huge opportunity, but mainly because of the way the island has performed during COVID. We've got a lot of interest looking here. And obviously we've got to have a certain balance. We've got to make sure that we've got to give the jobs to our Manx workers first. We've got to give housing to our Manx people first. And we have to make sure that happens, because I'm already hearing that they're being gazumped by people trying to buy from the UK already. So we need to act fast and make sure that affordable housing is there for our local people. But yes, it's definitely something that we absolutely need to make sure that everything continues, and we're there to support these businesses and bringing in new business. It could be a smaller company. It doesn't have to be a bigger company, but it could be, you know, small and medium-sized businesses. I talk a little bit about that in my manifesto. I talk about the medical cannabis,
Yes, indeed.
you know, and that could really create quite a lot of jobs. There are manufacturing, there's production, there's a lot accounts. It could be chief financial officers, obviously cleaners. It goes across the board. If you're bringing in a company like that that's going to do something that's quite as big as an industry as that, we've got a really big, huge opportunity for lots of people there on the island.
Again, cannabis, medicinal cannabis, prosecution for cannabis offences is something I want to touch on, particularly with yourself and Michael Josem a bit later on. Michael, just sticking with coronavirus for the moment, you say you would oppose any new coronavirus taxes. I mean, is there a suggestion there's going to be some on the island?
Sure. So listening to Manx Radio last night, some of the candidates talked about increasing the national insurance and other fees and charges. And so I think that, you know, there are so many families struggling. You know, as a volunteer for the Isle of Man Food Bank each week, I deliver food to a lot of families who are already struggling. They're already on the breadline, and sometimes they have difficulty keeping their head above water. So putting more pressure on those families is going to put more people under pressure.
And how would you protect the island if the pandemic returned?
Sure. So I think the first and most important thing is to take personal responsibility for action. And so that's why when I'm out canvassing, I'm carrying a mask in my pocket, because this is the first and the best way to protect ourselves. You know, I think that one of the most important things is to take personal responsibility there. Second of all, I want to increase testing at the border so that when people are arriving, that we do test people who are at risk of coming here, because I disagree with the government's strategy to allow people into the island without being tested. It's good that they are required to quarantine, but they can sometimes be in households with people who do not have to quarantine. And so I'm very nervous about that. And so that's why I think that the government and our community should be investing in additional testing at the border.
Looking at your manifesto, I think you said that government's current plan is to impose a second lockdown if the virus spreads widely. I mean, can you actually say that with certainty, that is what they would do?
Well, that's what they've published on their website. So if you go to covid.gov.im, they have a very clearly enunciated plan. They talk about a second lockdown if there is a surge in cases. One of the things that they do not talk about enough is about masks.
But do you believe, though, that when that initial plan was published, that the situation's evolved somewhat since then?
Well, if the situation has changed, then of course the plan should change. And so I can only go by
You'd be opposed to that, though?
So hang on, let's just be clear. I am very much supportive of changing the plan to reflect the new scientific advice. You know, when the information changes, I change my mind. You know, what's the alternative? And so I think it's entirely right for the government to change its plan. The plan that they currently have published, which talks about imposing a second lockdown, if there would be very dangerous. You know, I see that on the mental health, you know, already our mental health services have extraordinarily long waiting lists. I think it's very scary. We saw a surge in domestic violence. When the first lockdown was proposed, I published a series of 4 concrete actions that were about protecting women and children who are at vulnerability of being attacked through domestic violence. Unfortunately, the government didn't take quick action, but despite that, one of the things that I think is really important is we do everything we can to avoid that second lockdown.
COVID-19, David Fowler, you said you would have shut the borders slightly earlier.
Yes.
It's others have said that too. It's easy in hindsight, of course. But let me ask you, as we are now then,
yes,
when would you reopen the borders?
You've got to look at what's happening in the UK and the rest of the world. I think you just have to play it as it goes. But
I mean, I know you can't say a definitive date. We'll open them on October the 7th. But what would it have to take? What would the situation have to be for you to consider reopening the borders?
We'd have to have either 0 or very, very low cases in the UK, and it depends what the UK's policy is. Are they letting in foreigners from Europe and the rest of the world, because if they are, they could be spreading it to the British, and it could be dangerous opening the border. But I mean, hopefully, if all things go well, the border might be open, say, between January and April, but it all depends how the COVID goes, you know.
How do you think the government's handled the pandemic?
Not bad later on, as I say, but initially they didn't close the border early enough, but they're handling it not too bad now. But the thing that worries me, I think Michael was saying the same thing about the self-isolation rules, where, say, there's 4 people in the family, 2 go away and then 2 come back, and the other 2 people don't have to isolate. I think that's quite dangerous. And also, there's always going to be a small minority that think the rules don't apply to them. I mean, an idea I had was maybe to have ankle tags like prisoners have, and I did actually suggest this to one of the MHKs when I was canvassing, and she said she had put this to the Chief Minister, but he didn't want to do that.
You're on record as saying you're not so keen on the Chief Minister's politics.
Yeah.
What exactly are you not so keen on?
I don't know. I mean, some of the things he's done okay, but others he hasn't. Like, I mean, it was a serious mistake not shutting the border early enough.
Well, if you were Chief Minister for a day,
yeah,
what would you do? If you had one priority, what would you choose to do?
What you mean, right now?
With regards to COVID, what would you perhaps do differently?
Yeah. I mean, I'd do sort of what I was saying. You know, make the other people in the household self-isolate, and maybe bring in the tags for extra security. You know, because there's always going to be a small minority that think the rules don't apply, and that could be really dangerous.
We've seen that on this very day we're speaking now, actually.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Let's talk about some of your wishes away from COVID. I mean, I'll stay with you, David Fowler, if I may. You advocate for an all-island rating system. I mean, this is not a new discussion, but how do you envisage that happening?
Well, I think it's difficult because I think Tynwald have brought it up before. I think that quite a number of the MHKs outside of Douglas aren't very keen on the idea because they want to carry on having cheap rates bills, you know. But I did think of a twist on this which might get more support, and that would be to draw a line on the map. So you've got the bottom half of the map would have a Douglas rate, and then the top half would have a Ramsey rate. So people right up in the north who maybe might not come down and use the Douglas services wouldn't sort of complain. You know, it might be a fairer system like that.
Should we have an all-island rate, Claire Christian?
Someone's going to lose out and someone's going to benefit. It's a huge topic. I think actually this is somewhere where we possibly need a referendum on. We really need to ask our constituents as all, you know, as MHKs, we need to really ask the island what do they want. I can't. You know, we, as Michael says, we speak for our people, you know, and that's what we should be doing. I can see both sides of the story, and I can see obviously I live in Douglas, so you know we pay obviously the higher rates, but I can understand from someone from Ramsey not wanting to pay that high. It depends where you draw that. Not that line, but if you draw the line, are you going to the top rating or are you going to the bottom rating? So I think those need to be answered first of all, and we need to see what's going to happen. I think back to Michael's point and to my point that we don't really want to be putting more strain on the cost of living right now. If anything, we want to be really helping people and making sure that we're putting more money back in the pockets of our constituents and of local and nationally, and that's really what we want to be focusing on. An all-island national rates, I think it needs to be shelved for a time being, and we need to keep going, and we've got a lot to do in a year from my point of view.
Would you reassess it perhaps in 18 months, 2 years from now, or would you want a rate, or would you completely be opposed to it?
So I'd be very sceptical of politicians using some sort of rate review as a way to slip in through the back door some sort of increase in rates. But ultimately, the level of rates is an issue for local councillors, and so that's why if you want local rates to be lower, then you need to vote for local candidates and local councillors who believe in lower rates.
The election for local authorities is next year, of
Yeah.
course. You want to corporatise the airport.
Yes.
Why is that?
Well, I think that's a very good money-saving idea. I mean, Phil Gawn brought the idea up 10 years ago, and the savings would be sort of $2 or $3 million a year, you know. And
Have you got that in authority?
well, that was in the media. They said it would save at least.
Well, they always tell the truth.
At least,
so carry on. Yeah.
At least $2 million a
Yeah.
year. You know, and I mean, if they'd done that back then, compounded, you'd be looking at least 20 million in the bank that we haven't got now. You know.
It's interesting you mentioned the airport then, because I know, Michael Josem, you've spoken about air links in your manifesto, as indeed you have, Claire Christian. Do you believe in open skies?
I think that the best way to have the most secure and resilient service in the air through the Isle to the Isle of Man is by having a whole variety of different operators flying here. I'm very nervous of having some sort of monopoly operator. I don't know whether that technically counts as open skies or not, because I don't really care about the politics of the wording. I care about the outcome. And I think the outcome needs to be we have a diversity of operators operating through a diversity of routes. So that way, when one goes down, like Flybe did a couple of months ago, that where there are other ones who are able to step into the breach.
Where do you stand on the open skies policy? Because I know you've spoken about partnering with smaller airlines.
Yes, yeah. I think partnering is, you know, to be clear what that is, it would be actually investing with them, because right now...
The government investing with them?
It would be that, yeah. So if, and this is something that we need to start the discussions with. I'm not saying this is something we definitely go with, but we need to start looking at this, because possibly we may not have the ability to have this many airlines coming here. So we need to have this as a backup, and we need to be looking and talking and discussing with them how that we can partner and it be beneficial for both of us, because ultimately we don't want to get into a situation where we do not have transport off the island because all of the major airlines are closed.
Well, you're talking about transport. I mean, I know you've spoken, Michael Josem, about the steam packet company, and I know you said you felt there were insufficient connections to Ireland, for example. I mean, the user agreement would suggest otherwise, but you believe there should be more? Yeah,
so I've heard that loud and clear. The people of Douglas South have said that's a real problem for them, and so one of the difficulties is that the steam packet arrives into Ireland late at night, and unless you're staying at the port, it's not very convenient. And so I'm all about more services, more often, with cheaper fares. And so if the steam packet does not lift its game, especially with services, then let someone else operate.
Well,
no one's used. They're not many at the moment. So
are you suggesting there's an alternative provider to the steam packet then?
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that currently, under the current agreement, it is illegal for another operator to connect to Ireland. I think that if the steam packet doesn't lift its services to Ireland, then other operators should be allowed to serve that route. History
has taught us that there's not room for two operators on this this stretch of the Irish Sea between the Isle of Man and the adjacent isle. I mean, are you actually suggesting just the Irish route, or would you have competition on other routes? So when you talk about the history there, we're talking about the history of before I was born. I turned 40 years old next year, and so this is an issue from like the fact that someone was unable to run a successful business 40 years ago in when I was born doesn't have any meaningful bearing on what's for the next 40 years. Or does it? Because there were far more visitors recorded 40 years ago to the island than there are now. Yeah. So if that was not our tourism heyday, but certainly there was more scope then. Certainly, if it didn't work then, is it going to work now? So that talks about that at that time, 40 years ago, was a business model that was talking about a full service route to and from the UK. Right? And so it's possible that there might not be a full service route, but a second operator viable for that. And so I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is that if there are insufficient services to Ireland, then let us decriminalise the idea of people running a boat to and from Ireland. Yeah, if it doesn't work, then at least it's the independent companies' money on the line, not taxpayers. I mean, do you think the government would set up effectively what could be a rival firm because it's effectively in government ownership now?
Yeah, I can't see that happening. I think they've got to make their own boat right and get the right service, and that's why from my opinion, that's why they've stepped in and they're doing this now.
Was it the right thing to do?
Do you know, I've spoken to quite a few constituents about this that have worked or are working for Steam Packet, and they absolutely do think it was the right thing to do. And I think that, you know, the new boat that's being commissioned, I think that's going to be fantastic, because we have a situation where if one boat is not working for whatever reason, and, you know, suddenly you have to put all 800 people on the CCAT, that doesn't work. So we do need to have a better infrastructure for our boats. So I think the decision is working, yeah.
And Michael Josem, were you in favour of the government effectively taking ownership of the company?
Super sceptical of it, and I think that if you compare, you know, obviously we have this anomalous situation at the moment with the current coronavirus, but more broadly, you know, are fares lower than they were 2 years ago?
But thank goodness we have, because who knows whether they would have survived during COVID. So actually the fact that the government stepped in beforehand means that we have actually still got transport off the island, whether or not an airline can go or not.
Transport links, David Fowler?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not totally against the purchase of Steam Packet, but I think it was the wrong time, because you know, we need to save money for a rainy day, and you can see what's happened now. We've bought Steam Packet, and now we've had COVID, and we're seriously down on money. We should have stepped back and taken a breather, and maybe not bought it now, but looked to buy it in the future.
Let's change tack completely. I know one of your quotes, which people remember from 4 years ago, was about a theme park, perhaps a scaled-down version of Legoland.
Yes,
and you're still keen on that. Well, where would you put it? Where would you place it ideally? And secondly, presumably, if you want to pursue that, you don't need to be an elected member to do so.
Well, you've got a lot more influence if you're elected, but I mean, I don't know where it would go. It would go somewhere on the island, but the company that does the theme parks, Merlin, they do the sea life centres. So even if we couldn't get a theme park, we could get like a sea life centre somewhere on the island, as we're so coastal. Also, talking about tourism, 10 years ago, centre parks came here, and they were really, really enthusiastic about setting up a centre here, but the government turned them away. So, you know, maybe we could... I don't think that's in the manifesto, but maybe we could get them back and get talking. I'm sure we can do some sort of things to improve tourism here and the economy and everything.
You talk about centre parks, then it leads me on to the environment, which certainly is in your manifesto.
Yes.
It's a passion of yours. How can you help it?
Oh, lots of ways. I mean, I think the Chief Minister's target of 80-odd thousand trees is not a very...
well, you'd
good target.
A million.
Yeah, a million, yes, a million. That's what we want, you know. It'll help the biodiversity of the island. It'll soak up the CO2 emissions. There's nothing better for soaking up the CO2 than planting lots and lots of trees, you know.
I want to move on to cannabis, medicinal cannabis. Claire Christian, you obviously support licensing it. You've said that both from a health perspective and outlining the jobs it would create.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that it would appear behind the scenes to be moving ever closer anyway, one way or the other. So regardless of who's successful in this campaign a week on Thursday, do you think that's where it should stop, medicinal cannabis, or do you believe they should go a step further and implement recreational use? So
I've done a little bit of investigation and spoken to lots of local people on the island about this. The evidence at the moment is that people under the age of 30 that are using using cannabis, it does affect their brains, and it doesn't the brain development. But after 30, it's not the same. So I think we need to look at it definitely and investigate this even more. I think one of the major things that we could resolve right now is when somebody is caught by the police with a very small quantity of cannabis, and right now they're going to court. It's a great expense for, you know, £24 worth of cannabis or something like that. I think there could be a better way of doing this, of penalising people. It could be an on-the-spot fine for the first 3, as long as there's no actual idea to that they were going to go on and sell it, as long as that's not the case. But I think those on-the-spot fines for the first 3, and then after that it could go to court. I think that will also help the police, because they have so much to do, and so, you know, there's far more important things for them to be.
Well, their resources are stretched out as
absolutely.
it is, of course. Michael Josem, you've touched upon this in your manifesto, and putting the medicinal cannabis to one side now. You mentioned taxpayers' resources. Effectively, what like Christians just said, they're being wasted by prosecuting people for small amounts, which I know you've said is bad for the offenders and their family. You say bad,
and bad for our community too, yeah.
But bad for the offenders. Isn't that a contradiction in terms? Because if you're an offender, as you put it, you should be punished.
So I think we need to differentiate between those crimes that are evil and those crimes that are stupid. And you know, this week we saw in the newspaper that there was a drugs raid in Onken, where the police in their drugs raid managed to recover 1.2 grams of. I can't even imagine how.
A minuscule amount in the scheme of things.
It's trivial, right? And so the idea of having a drugs raid for such trivial amounts of drugs, wasting the court's time, wasting the taxpayers' time and money. You know, there are more important things to do, and for us as a community, than to prosecute invariably young men who are invariably from our patch, who for these silly little crimes in Onken and in Annika and in Pulrose. You know, it's a waste of time, and I think we need to get away from that. And so for these people who are users, you know, I think that even the most ardent drugs warrior in the world would argue that the theoretical victim there is the user themselves. And if that's the case, then we need to look at other strategies.
Where do you draw the line? Where is the benchmark? Should cannabis be recreationally, legally allowed, or do you draw a line when it becomes a bigger amount?
Yeah, so I think that people who are selling drugs to our children, they can go rot in hell for all I care. And so I think we need to differentiate there between those people who are doing crimes of evil, you know, whether they are child sex offenders or whatever. If you're an evil criminal, then you can go rot in jail for all I care. But then there are also crimes of triviality and of stupidity, and so I think that there's an opportunity for some real meaningful criminal justice reform. So that instead of having these people who are invariably from, you know, underprivileged backgrounds to begin with, rather than getting into a spiral of fines and penalties and so on, I'd rather talk about things of community service. So that way they can contribute to building our island, so that we can be stronger in the future and improving our island, rather than locking up young men from Annika and Pulrose and elsewhere for trivial amounts of cannabis.
Claire, Christian?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify just something that Michael was just saying there. I don't think the police were wasting their time. They were going there on evidence, and that turned out not to be fruitful. And I think that we need to respect what the police do, and the fact that they went there and did that drugs raid. But yes, in that instance it wasn't, but that's down to intelligence, and unfortunately it didn't work that time. They would not have wasted time in doing that, and effort. Our police are very, very great at what they do, and would strive to obviously make a bigger deal than that, but it is unfortunate in that case that it was only a small amount.
Yeah, so I think Claire's right there, that this is an extraordinary burden on the police's time. The Chief Constable's report last year talked about 10 to 15% of police time being spent on this sort of thing, and really, you know, this puts people into the spiral of deprivation, whereby it makes it harder for these people to get jobs. It makes it harder for them to escape that cycle, and so that's why I'd rather be much more positive about these things. Look for the opportunities and then to grow our island so it can be stronger. That's why I talk about community service, not fines.
Yeah. Where do you stand on this issue, David Fowler?
Similar sort of views. I think the medicinal cannabis should be allowed, you know, because if it's got medical benefits, why not? And it'll add business to the island and things. But I do agree that also people with little amounts should have some sort of on-the-spot fine or community service, you know, because it is costing a lot of taxpayers' money, taking them through the courts, etc. You know, and the resources could be used a lot better elsewhere.
Let's move on to education, because if ever there are 3 issues in an election in life, it's health, education and the economy. I mean, you were a teacher, Claire Christian. Yeah. You've nothing but praise for the teachers. I see that in your manifesto. So would you give them a rise?
Yeah.
What would you give them? Would you give them what they're asking for?
So they're asking for 9% above any yearly rise. I think what we need to do is we need to definitely review that, and we need to look at bringing it in line with the high cost of living, because we have a higher cost of living than the UK, and we really need to respect that. These teachers are, I know from personal experience, and this isn't just the teachers over here, but we are down on resources. The amount of teaching that they do, they don't have the time to teach. There's so much red tape and bureaucracy, and it goes on to the night when they're doing lesson planning, weekends, everything, and we really need to support those teachers. They're frontline, they need rewarding, and we need to show that and reflect that.
It is the attitude of some, not all of their unions, because the department now says there's nothing else to put on the table to resolve this dispute. There's been a lot of discussion back and fro for a couple of years now. Do you accept a lot of because of the attitude of one or two unions, that public goodwill is fading fast?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think we've got to make sure that we keep the negotiations and the talking very fair, and we need to listen to both sides.
Is 9% a realistic amount to be asking for?
Do you know what we want to be asking? We want to be saying, is our children's education the most important thing? And that is the most important thing. And actually,
at any cost?
Not at any cost, but we need to make that reflect in the cost of living, and we do have a higher cost of living over here. And if we can reduce that, then maybe we don't need to put it up to the 9%, but we need to reflect that. One of the things that we're always talking about a happy society, and we're looking at inviting or encouraging people to come here and live here and bring their children here. And we need to have happy children, healthy children. We need to have lots of effort put into making it an equal education. We need to give our children the right sort of benefits in terms of skills, how to cope with mental illness, we spoke a little bit about before, coping with these situations. And we've got a lot of mental health issues coming up because of people losing their jobs, etc. And so we really need to make sure that our teachers are being supported in that way. So it's not just pay, it is also working conditions, and that is really important that we look at the working conditions for their teachers as well.
David Fowler and then Michael Josem. Yes. Has this issue been raised by many people when you've been out and about meeting would-be voters?
A few, not many.
And is there a consistency in what you're hearing?
I mean, my personal view is I think really in an ideal world we'd have an open checkbook and give everyone lots of pay rises, but really in reality we should all muck in together. I mean, I don't know if you heard, but recently the MHKs were offered 2 3/4% pay rise, and the vast majority of them have turned it down and said, no, we'll keep the public purse strong, and we won't take that money, you know.
You'd have been pleased at that, because I know you've said that you believe that very few MHKs and MLCs, members of the Legislative Council for that matter, you don't believe their salaries are justified, and you believe their holidays are too long. I think
possibly their salaries and pensions might be justified if they didn't have such long holidays. You know.
Do you think they stop working when the Keys, the Upper Chamber and Tynwald doesn't sit?
I think possibly not. I don't know for certain, but I think they'd still be working in departments. But even the departments have long holidays as well, don't they? You know. That's
what you believe, yeah?
That's what I believe. I don't know it for a fact, but I'm assuming that, you know.
Just switching back to education, has it been raised with you often, Michael Josem?
Yeah, absolutely. And so a number of people have said that during the coronavirus lockdown, we did the weekly clap for a whole bunch of essential workers, and so I am unreservedly in favour of paying more for our essential workers. And so during the lockdown, I raised with the British government the idea of introducing a coronavirus medal for service for essential workers, and that was about recognising them spiritually. But I also think that we should recognise that the essential workers, whether it be frontline workers, whether it be teachers or fire officers or police officers or ambulance workers or nurses and doctors, if you're a frontline essential worker, then I think that we should pay you fairly.
Do we as it stands?
I think there are real questions about it. I'm unreservedly, and maybe I'm a bit of an outlier compared to the other candidates, I'm unreservedly in favour of paying essential workers more.
And where would the money come from?
So I think that we have enough revenue to do that. I'm very sceptical of things such as investing millions of pounds in bridges up in the northwest of the island. I'm very sceptical of that sort of stuff.
You're opposed to the railway line scheme, yeah.
Super sceptical. You know, I would much rather invest that sort of infrastructure into central Douglas, where it's going to be used by hundreds of people a day.
Michael Josem is wanting to use extra money for those frontline workers, essential workers. Would that eat in too much into some of the reserves you've been trying to protect?
I mean, it might do. I mean, from what I've read about the dispute, it's actually going to affect the children, the students, because if they give them the 3% or whatever it is they're offering...
Ultimately 9 is what they're asking for.
Yeah, it'll eat into the budgets. The money will come out the students' budgets to pay the teachers, and it'll be a detriment to the students, you know. Also, on the point of the teachers, I did bump into a teacher when I was canvassing, and she was telling me a strange story, actually. Here we have advisory head teachers, 11 of them apparently, and they're on some kind of silly salary, like 6 figures or something, and there's 11 of them. So that's probably costing over £1 million a year.
Well, let me just part that and ask Claire and Michael, is government too top-heavy with senior middle management, looking in from the outside where you are?
Can we go first?
Please, yeah.
So I talk about streamlining government. It's quite clear in we are too top heavy in managerial side. It's obviously we need to look at the civil service as well as in terms of the actual government, but we need to make this work. We need to use technology to make it work faster and quicker and efficient and be more transparent.
Have great strides been made in that regard already, do you think, or not enough?
I don't think enough.
Right.
I think what the problem is obviously the government feel that being one of the biggest provider of jobs, and so it kind of works both ways. If they've got lots of jobs available, it keeps people unemployed. But if you've got a large, heavy government, obviously that's taxpayers' money that's paying those salaries. So they've got to kind of maybe look at privatising some of those areas and giving that to external companies to actually deal with those issues that aren't needed 12 months of the year, 24 hours a day. You know, yeah. So
you talk about streamlined and being efficient. Does that include elected representatives as well? Either locally or nationally?
So that's an interesting, because I know one of the other candidates has spoken about reducing the amount of MHKs, and I think that's a very risky area to go into, because if you, for example, if David and I were to get in, and we would certainly help and support each other, and we have a large constituency. It's 5,000 people. But if you were a candidate, let's just say, and not gone around knocking on the door over the last 6 weeks, and you're one person and you get in, you get voted, you don't have a clue what that constituency is. So you're leaving a lot open to just one candidate being actually very, very good. And at least we could work together and actually make things happen and challenge together and talk for the voice of our constituency. Value for money, that's what people want. And they want to know what candidate they're picking is going to work, for every cent that they can, and that's certainly what I will do. You're going to get 100% from me till midnight every night and weekends, and I'll probably end up working for something like £4 an hour that it actually works out by the time I put in my actual hours for the month, because that's the kind of person I am. So if you pick me, you're going to get really good value for money and a great investment in your return.
All candidates, of course, will say and praise themselves naturally. Interestingly, there are a handful of candidates, none in this room tonight, I hasten to add, who, I'm a South Douglas taxpayer, that I haven't seen or even had any literature from yet. Do you think that people do still want that knock on the door and want to see you in person and talk to you, or do you think as long as they can read something or see it online or see something through their letterbox, that's sufficient nowadays. Michael Josem, what do you think? Because you've got a mix, haven't you? You've been quite high profile online, but you've also been pounding the streets, if you like.
Sure. And so look, different people want different things. But one of the things that I hearing, time and time again is that we need to focus on health and we need to focus on jobs. And so that's why I'm very sceptical and nervous when I hear talk of privatisation, because I've not had anyone say that we need to privatise any services. I'm very nervous about such talk, and I am unreservedly want to stand, and I've spoken to many voters over the last few weeks, but also a few months, that's why I'm running, so that we can have someone who will fight for our jobs, fight to protect our health service, so it's universal, it's local and it's high quality, and then finally also to ease the squeeze on budgets. They're the things that people are worried about, not how you communicate.
Is government top heavy?
Look, I think,
are we over-governed as an island?
So I think that it's weird in our community that we have 24 different local authorities. We have an awful lot of that, and we also have some important frontline services, and so I would much rather focus on the frontline service to support police on the streets, to support doctors and nurses in the hospitals, to support those things, rather than backroom managers. And so the way I would go about doing that is about empowering. So for example, in the schools, I'd rather empower local school communities to have greater control of their schools, rather than having to report to a central, such a strong and centrally controlled authority in Douglas.
Well, we have a lot of local authorities. We have 24 members of Tynwald. Is that about right?
So I'm very nervous about reducing those things, because I think the proper function of Tynwald is to be a check on the government, in that that is the fundamental basis of our Manx constitutional structure. And so I'm very nervous about those things, because when the government comes with its proposals, they should be scrutinised very carefely.
I was just going to answer to your question about in answer to your question about people, what we're seeing on the door. I'm getting thank you so much for actually taking the time and coming to the door, and I know you've said the same thing. People are. Yes, they like the social media, and we live in a digital world, and that's great, but actually that interaction with people is so important, because you see the sincerity and the necessity in those eyes of those people, and you feel more for that. And I haven't just done that, I've also gone out with a ride along with the police last week, because I wanted to see the mental health issues that we're in on the island. I want to see the community work that the police do for myself, because I think I will stand better for the police and for our local constituents, having that knowledge and being able to say that that the police force need mental health probes next to them. They need to be able to call upon them when they need to, during the night, during the day, to help our society immediately.
We've touched upon education, health, even home affairs there, if you like. I know you say, Clyde Christian, that roads and pavements in certain parts are in a shocking state, and I know also you've got an issue with speed limits. I mean, there's at least there's a few vacancies needed on the Department of Infrastructure at the moment. So have you made your concerns known?
So yes, I have. But basically, the roads, yes, and pavements are in a shocking state. Again, through going round the constituency and meeting with the vulnerable, elderly, and they are struggling. And it's not just that, but we have an Equality Act that is in force in 2020, and we have an absolute obligation to make sure that our pavements can be are easy accessible to disabled people. Those kind of situations are really, really important. We need to change this now, and we need to have an actual resposibility to do that.
The Equality Act came in, of course,
2017,
couple of years ago, but by the time it was implemented fully.
2020, yeah.
Are we behind in aspects of that Equality Act, do you believe, Michael?
So I think that we need to stop unfair discrimination when it takes place. So in fact, I released a policy paper about this just this week, talking about how we need to stop discrimination, and that people should be judged on the content of their character, not on any other demographics, and that's what's really important here. And I imagine we're all unified in that principle.
I'm sure we are. Let me ask you, Michael, about the party, because you're obviously the chairman of Lib Van. It's had, I think it's fair to say, it's had limited success since 2006 at a national level. Has party politics got a role to play?
I think that the role that party politics has to play is about having additional institutions to represent the people of the Isle of Man, to bring new ideas into the fore. I'm very nervous and sceptical of a central government bunker where all the ideas come out of it. And so I'm a big fan of different institutions in our community, whether they be the Rotary Club, whether it be the political club, whether it be the sporting club, the trade unions, the Chamber of Commerce. I think that our society is strongest when there are different institutions in our community, each coming up and contributing ideas to this, this sort of debate, this sort of discussion.
I say Lib Van's had a limited success rate. Ironically, in South Douglas, I think it's had a representation for 12 of the last 15 years. So perhaps that bodes well for the Lib Van candidate. Who knows? But
it's up to the voters.
It's up to the voters. It is indeed. But if elected, you said you would not take a role, certainly initially within government. So you would not even take on a departmental role. I mean, would you accept any committee positions?
Yeah, so I think there's a role to play as a legislator, but let me be very clear about
the Legislative Council are there primarily to legislate. Would you take on a committee role? You wouldn't accept a departmental role.
The Legislative Council isn't there primarily to legislate. The Legislative Council is there to review the legislation.
Scrutinise.
Yeah, exactly right. And so, I think there's a role to play in the parliamentary committees, but I will not take the salary uplift. I will not take that departmental role, because as we were talking about before, if we don't have enough money to pay teachers more, then we do not have enough money to pay Michael Josem more. So my position on that is very clear. I will not take a departmental role. I will not take the salary uplift, because there are people in our community who are struggling. And if we can't pay teachers more, we can't pay me more. But
would you be restricted by not taking on any roles at all if you were successful? Would it almost make you useless and toothless for the first 12 months?
Well, not at all. I think that Tynwald is a great honour. Would be a great honour to serve in. I think Tynwald is an important institution in our community, and I think that unreservedly fighting in Tynwald, unencumbered by this silly notion of collective responsibility that this current government insists on so strictly, I think that will allow me to be a voice 100% for the voters of Douglas South and no one else.
Has collective responsibility not held the island in good stead for the last 34 years?
I think we would be better if we had free and open debate. And so what collective responsibility is about in private, ministers and some politicians have a private view, but then in public they're required to have a different view.
So
that is entirely absurd to me, in that I think our politicians should be honest in private, and I think our politicians should be honest in public too.
Like Christian then, do we not have a free, healthy debate in Tynwald? Are we not transparent enough?
Collective responsibility is something that's used in the private sector to a certain point. So if you're in a board meeting, you all decide you're going to use such and such manufacturer, you all agree that, and you go off and you do that and perform that. But when you're in government and when you're talking about moral issues, ethics, etc., I think that these are bigger issues. You can't just expect everybody to agree with the Chief Minister or whoever, or the majority of the vote. So I think that Michael is definitely right, and I would stand with him on that we need to have a far more open Tynwald. It needs to definitely be transparent. I talk about that. We need to absolutely make sure that happens.
Is it not transparent enough, or should I say, have you not seen any indications in the last few years of issues where the government has lost the day, has lost the vote, because there are free votes on certain issues, and in some cases because members have gone against their own departments?
Yes, yeah, we have seen that, haven't we? And very bravely, those members have done that and gone against the collective responsibility.
Bravely or stupidly, or a bit of both, depending on the issue?
Depending on the issue, obviously.
I think that's exactly right. They are brave, and we've got to remember. I'm sure he won't mind me mentioning his name, but there's a man called Howard Quayle who's a resident of Annika, and I was chatting with him the other day, and I said to him, we've got to remember that my boss, and our boss, if any of us are elected, is Howard Quayle of Annika, not Howard Quayle of Tynwald, and that the number one servant, or the number one boss of the people of Tynwald must be the people of the Isle of Man, in this case the people of Douglas South.
David Fowler?
Yeah, I think the collective responsibility is wrong. We should do everything we can to try and remove it, because it's not the Howard Quayle party. We're independent MHKs, and we should have the right to vote the way the people want, the way we see things. You know, it's undemocratic to have collective responsibility.
So do you think ministerial government could work without it?
Absolutely.
You do?
Yeah,
all three of you in agreement on that?
Yes, yes.
And it'll work because the people of the Isle of Man are smart people. Yeah. They can understand that, hey, like even on some of these issues today, the things that unite us are much more important than the things that we disagree on. And that we can have an argument over whether the tax rate should be 20 or 21 or 22 or whatever percent it should be, right? But the things that are important, we all are unreservedly agree. And I think that the people of the Isle of Man are mature and responsible enough to see that there is public and vibrant debate.
And what if, in the future, if you were in Comyn and your constituents didn't want what you were voting for? Surely you're then going against what you've said, trying to get elected. That I'm going, I'm not listening to my constituents.
We're all in violent agreement here.
It puts you in such a bad position, and no wonder people like myself who lives in Douglas South, no wonder you feel that they're not doing what you want them to do.
It's interesting you say that, because where would you stand as a representative of a party? I mean, if the majority of your constituents were telling you one thing, which was strictly against the party policy, would you lean towards the constituents?
So let me be very, very clear. My number one allegiance is always nation before party. There's no higher power than the people of the Isle of Man. My allegiance is 100% the people of the Isle of Man.
So obviously there have been a number of Lib Van candidates who have defected from the party after being elected because they didn't agree with the party's stance. I'm not saying it would happen, but would you not hesitate doing the same if that situation arose?
So I think it's a bit weird to think of there's some sort of disagreement between the Liberal Vannon as a political institution and the people of the Isle of Man, in that our goals are entirely aligned, and that when we have the stormy seas of the world...
They are now, but if there was an issue, would it be constituent first or party first?
Unreservedly the people of the Isle of Man first. 100%. No question about it. Nation always before party.
What have you learned during this election campaign, David Fowler?
That people are sort of...
Other than the candidates are a friendly bunch.
Yeah, I mean, the candidates are a friendly bunch, obviously, yeah, but I mean, people are sort of fed up with the politics here, and I think it's to do with things like this collective responsibility. They think there's democracy is lacking. You know, we need to be more open and transparent and things, and get rid of the collective responsibility and improve the democracy here. You know.
Do you think we're not democratic enough, Claire?
I think there's ways that we could be more democratic, and to repeat the collective responsibility, obviously removing that would be a lot helpful. So let's talk about MLCs. Is that democratic enough?
It's a natural it's a natural link, really. I mean, I would get the impression, without having a pre-conversation with you, that all three of you are opposed to members of the Legislative Council being elected by the members of the Keys. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And so when I was a senior leader at PokerStars, we had our audit function always reported separately and directly to the board without being reporting into senior management. And so what that was about is ensuring that basic principles of governance, in that the Legislative Council cannot act as a proper check on the House of Keys when the Legislative Council is a wholly owned subsidiary of the House of Keys.
Has the Legislative Council lost a bit of respect because of the Keys members, in that over the last few decades, some of them have used the election to the upper chamber for the wrong reasons?
Absolutely, and I think it's a... You know what, we talked a little bit about this before, you know, actually we're all here trying to get the job of our life, you know, we don't even have someone actually doing a personal reference on us. We don't even, you know, things like this, I would expect to have happened on me, some kind of personal reference. You know, I can certainly provide it if you like it, James, but I think things like this, it needs to be more open. If we're going to have an MLCs that are chosen by the MHKs, and we need to be more open with the public about who's running and who they are, and let them be a part of this. I'm not saying, do you know what, the other flip side of it is, aren't the public tired of voting? And if they're having to vote for 24 and then another 11 and then another chief minister role, are they tired of voting, or do they actually physically want that?
Or don't the public, for example, the chief minister election, do not the public put their faith in you or two of you to elect the next chief minister? Is that not sufficient, or should there be a referendum for the next chief minister? I mean, how far do you take it here? If you went out to the public every time, you'd never get anything done.
You wouldn't. You absolutely wouldn't. But, you know, if you've got... And also it begs the question that if you had two candidates, what happens if it's a 50-50? You know, you've absolutely got that. Maybe then it then goes to the MHKs to make that decision. That final decision is done by them. And are we? You're right. Are we getting the right kind of calibre that are actually going forward for the chief minister role, or
indeed the legislative council?
Or indeed,
what's your view, Michael Josem, in terms of the chief minister? Should he or she be elected by the public?
Well, so I like the idea on first glance. But when you look at it into a little bit of deeper, I'm very sceptical, because that represents the institution of a presidential system. I don't think that the republics of the US or France are exactly covering themselves in glory with their presidential selections. And so I think that ultimately the job of any of us as members of the House of Keys must be to keep the ministry accountable and to hold them accountable. And so I like the idea, but I just don't think it'll work in practice. And we've got over 1,000 years of history of Tynwald. I'd be very nervous about any moves that weaken the power of Tynwald, because I think it's an important institution, and I think that the heritage of the Isle of Man is something that needs to be protected and preserved.
I just do wanted to actually reference something specifically in both your, Claire, and Michael's manifesto. I know you said you're keen on the development of a sexual assault referral centre in the island, I read. I mean, can you expand a bit on that, and how much, if you've looked into it, do you know how much it would cost?
So it's not a very nice subject, unfortunately, to talk about. But what happens right now is if you as a victim, you have a sexual offence against you, you have to travel to the UK. So imagine if that was your daughter or son, that you had to put them on an aeroplane and go to the UK in the clothes that the offence happened in. And I know I've spoken to many parents that they don't even know that that's the situation, that there is not the forensic side here on the island to be able to cope and manage with that. And we need absolutely to sort that and make that happen now. The SARC has to, hands down, be one of the most important things.
Have you looked into how much it would cost, out of interest, or not yet?
I haven't looked. There are costs, yes, absolutely. Obviously, I think off the top of my head, I think that the budgets happen. It may not have, it's been agreed, but it's not been fully. I think there's some qualms there over it.
Okay. And Michael Josem, in terms of, you've spoken publicly about sentences for certain assaults, sexual assaults being too lenient. Each case is different, of course, but you're very firm in your beliefs on this one.
Yeah, and that my belief is very simple, that if you sexually abuse a child, you should go to prison. I feel like I can't even believe that in 2020 we even have to have this conversation. It is embarrassment that this does not already happen. It just needs to be fixed.
David Fowler, has anybody mentioned similar issues to you?
Yes, I think they have, yes. I mean, I think the call for tougher sentences, the law is there. It's the magistrates that are being too lenient. They're not giving stiff enough sentences. I mean, it's also like that person that breached the COVID rules. They were only given 6 weeks when the law says they could have 3 months. They should have thrown the book at them and made an example of them, given them the full 3 months.
Let us just talk about a couple of issues in South Douglas before we wrap it up. Lack of affordable housing, it's a decade-old problem. The question to all three of you, starting with you, David Fowler, how do you resolve it?
It's a difficult one, that, but all I know is that we need to have a fairer system. We need to have rigorous sort of means testing, because from what I've spoken to people, there's a lot of people that shouldn't be getting the housing. They're taking up the housing. You know, because you're tested initially to go into the social housing, and you could be penniless, and 2 or 3 years later you could have a really, really good job, and you're still in that house. And I don't think that's very fair. You know, maybe we've got enough social housing already, but we won't know unless we do a sort of rigorous sort of means testing.
Have we got sufficient affordable housing already, even if it's not available?
So definitely what David's talking about is, I totally agree that we need to means test, because there could be definitely some available housing. We don't have enough affordable housing right now. This is an issue. We shouldn't be affecting regenerating in our green belt. We need to be looking at derelict sites. We need to be looking at those areas. One of the major areas that obviously in Douglas South is the Spring Valley situation. I've brought that up in my manifesto. They've had a very unfortunate situation, and I say unfortunate politely, that over the last 2 to 3 years they've had continuous conversations with both the government and Douglas Borough Council, and no one seems to have unfortunately given them the right answer or one on what they're going to do. And I believe now it is going to be a redevelopment. And you know, there's certain things and way around that we can be doing this, and I know I will work with Douglas Borough Council, and I will definitely be a better voice and work with them. I'm very want to change this. That's when I sat down with Claire Wells and with David Christian, and I said to them, I'm starting this election campaign. What kind of MHK do you want? You know, how do you want to make this work better for our constituents? And that's really essential. They've never had somebody that actually asked them that, and I'm quite shocked. And I think it's really, really important. Yeah. No one's actually saying, and I want to be able to change that, not just within Douglas South, change that communication and make this so that we do work together. And we do, I'm not saying that people don't work together at all, but I think that we have to do what's right for the constituents, number one. And I think Michael will agree with me, and David will agree with me on that. So yeah. Lack
of affordable housing, major problem in South Douglas?
Yeah, big problem. And so that's why the number one thing in my manifesto is about jobs, and it's about building housing and redeveloping central Douglas, so we can build housing in central Douglas. It's a tragedy almost that the centre of our nation's capital is literally in ruins, and it's, you know, there are these buildings literally crumbling. We have this empty asphalt car park in Lord Street and Fort Street and Parade Street. You know, the centre of our nation's capital should be something that we can be proud of, and so that's why I want to get people to work. We can take advantage of this sudden spike in unemployment and put people to work building housing, which is not just good for jobs. It's good for housing, it's good for the environment, because if you put it into central Douglas, then you don't need to commute so far. It doesn't put additional stress on car parking around the place, and it doesn't continue the continued urban sprawl. And so that's why it's good for the environment, it's good for jobs, and it's good for families to ease a squeeze on the cost of living.
On the cost of living, we're talking about infrastructure and housing, and your manifesto talks about investing in roads and cycle tracks and broadband access. I know I mean, are you aware of the Island's National Broadband Plan?
Yeah, so the Isle of Man National Broadband Plan talks about having fibre that goes past houses or homes, but it doesn't necessarily say you can actually connect to it. So for example, one of the problems in some apartment buildings, Manx Telecom won't connect unless certain thresholds of participation are reached, and I think we need to fix that. In terms of cycle paths, for example, you know, one of the things that is really important to the people of Pulrose, Annika, Farm Hill and Saddlestone is to be able to connect those parts of our town in with central Douglas. So that's why I've proposed a costed £12,000 adjustment to the connection of Pulrose Road and Springfield Road, so that you can, you know, go straight through there on your bike much more easily, and then connect through the nunnery, have a bridge over Douglas River there, and get that built so that people can also ease the stress on car parking.
thank you, one and all. There is so much we could still talk about, but I think, well, there's canvassing to be done for one thing. I'd just like to round up by inviting each of you to make a short closing statement. And we'll go in the same order as we started, if I may. So, Claire, if you'd just like to, I suppose the question is, why should the people of South Douglas invest their vote in you?
Thank you, James. So, I'm the candidate who has a deep understanding of our neighbourhood and economy. Not just local business experience, but I also have international experience managing large budgets, departments and infrastructure. Our goal is to have a caring and prosperous society that provides equal opportunity, quality education and a safety net. I'm the candidate who has the future vision to strengthen our long-term financial position by establishing a sovereign fund of prudent investments to invigorate our economy and grow our strategic reserve. We are now in a post-COVID Brexit world, which offers huge opportunity to the island because of its size, because of its location, because of its independence, and because we have an ability to adapt. It's key that we have an agile, less red tape heavy system in place. I want to see a government that is streamlined, efficient, transparent, and one that uses a comprehensive approach, flexing between departments and multi-skilling. I'm the candidate that lives in Douglas South who will work closer with Douglas Borough Council and to the benefit of all Douglas South constituents. And I want to be judged on what I deliver, not just what I say. And I will always be honest and truthful and transparent with you.
Thank you, Claire. Christian. Michael Josem.
Sure. Our campaign has been from the start about providing a strong voice for the people of Douglas South into the government. And so that's why I'm running, to be a strong voice for jobs, to be a strong voice for healthcare, and to be a strong voice for easing the squeeze on household finances. This campaign is only taking place because, unfortunately, Mr Malarkey and Ms Costain were unable to complete their terms. And the fact that both of them had very serious health issues is in itself a powerful reminder of how important it is that we have a health system that is local, high quality and accessible to everyone. And so that's why I will be a strong voice to fight for the people of Douglas South, to ensure that our health service is able to see off this current threat of coronavirus. That's why I'm a big fan of increasing testing. That's why I'm a big fan of keeping safe, our island safe in this wonderful bubble where we can sit here on a stage right next to each other without fear of infecting each other. And so in coming weeks, and in fact next week on August 27th, I invite you to join our campaign, to be a strong voice, to join our message here, which is about taking the people of Douglas South to build our island so it will be strong whichever way we are thrown in the future.
Thank you, Michael Josem. And finally, David Fowler, why should the voters put a cross against your name?
I think they should vote for me because I'm really compassionate and I want to help the people, the environment, the economy, not just locally but nationally, and I think I've got the right solutions to the problems, and I can make the Isle of Man a really great place to live and work, you know.
Thank you for watching. Thank you also to our production team, and thank you for all the candidates as well for joining us. Michael Josem, Claire Christian, David Fowler, very much appreciated. All the very best of luck to all of you on August the 27th, and we will speak to the other candidates one way or the other in part 2 of this programme. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, darling.
Thank you.
Thank you.